Yeah, this story, by the way, it does feel like a mix of the movies The Zone of Interest and Jojo Rabbit, but I don't think this movie is as good as either one of those two movies. Hello, and thank you for joining me here today at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about The Boy in the Striped Pajamas by John Boyne, released in 2006, and I'm comparing it with the movie by the same name, directed by Mark Herman and released in 2008. This was requested by Nicola Cola, so thank you so much for requesting this one. I was aware of the movie, but it definitely, this wasn't on my radar as a future episode until you brought it to my attention, so thank you so much for requesting this one. And this is the story of Bruno, a young German boy whose father is a Nazi who is put in charge of running one of the concentration camps. But Bruno, it is told from his perspective, and he is very naive and he doesn't realize the truth of this situation. And while the movie does stay pretty close to the basic, main plot of the book, there are still some key changes that cause me to have different feeling towards the book and movies, and I'm just going to get right into the plot, so there will be spoilers going forward, and I'm going to begin with talking about Bruno and his family. So with the book, right from the start, I really liked Bruno. I found him very endearing and sweet and smart while also being very innocent and naive, and to me, he read like a believable boy. And we hear about how he is very adventurous and he likes exploring, and I thought John Boyne just did a great job at including just little details about him and the tone in which the book was written. He just gave Bruno such a distinct, believable personality, and I felt very connected to him. So the book begins with him finding out that he and his family are moving, and then in the book, they specifically say that his dad is in charge of Auschwitz. So once they move to this home near this camp, we then get flashbacks that show us the dad's promotions. We even have a scene where they have dinner with Hitler, and we also hear about how his grandmother, so his father's mother, disapproves of the fact that Bruno's dad is a Nazi. And we get all of this in the movie as well. We do not get the scene with Hitler, but in the movie, this is all told to us chronologically, whereas in the book, it is told through flashbacks. But in both, the grandmother ends up dying partway through. In the movie, it says that the city she was living in, I guess Berlin, was bombed, and that's how she dies. Whereas in the book, we hear that she gets sick and dies. But in both, they go to her funeral, and in both, Hitler has sent some kind of garland. And in the book, the mom says how the grandmother would be rolling in her grave if she knew that, because she was so against Hitler and the Nazi Party. And then in both book and movie, Bruno meets a man named Pavel. So he is someone who is brought over from the camp, and he will cut their vegetables, and then at dinner time, he helps serve their meals. And one day, Bruno falls and hurts his knee, and Pavel is the one who is around, so he helps bandage Bruno's knee. And as they are talking, he finds out that Pavel used to be a doctor, and he thinks that Pavel voluntarily chose to stop being a doctor and came here to live at these camps instead, not realizing obviously that it was against his will. And in the movie, when the mom hears that Pavel has helped Bruno with his knee, she hesitantly thanks him for it. Whereas in the book, she doesn't thank Pavel. However, Bruno overhears her talking to the other servants, and she tells them if my husband asks, tell him that I fixed Bruno's knee, not Pavel. And Bruno thinks she's doing this just to be selfish so that she can get the praise for having helped Bruno, not realizing that she is actually saying this because the husband would be very upset if he had found out that a Jewish person had helped their son with his knee. And then we get a later dinner scene where Pavel is helping, serve dinner, and he's going too slow, and this upsets the father. And they have another Nazi officer at dinner with them named Lieutenant Kotler, and Lieutenant Kotler lashes out at Pavel and he beats him up. And in the book, it's not described, and in the movie, it happens off camera. But clearly, it was, this very violent outburst, and we see in both how Bruno is just very affected by this violent scene. And speaking of Lieutenant Kotler, so he is a 19-year-old who is stationed to work at Auschwitz. And in both, he is a jerk to Bruno. And while at that dinner, one of the reasons he strikes out at Pavel is because he mentions his father. And turns out his father had left Germany in 1938. And so the implication is that his father had left Germany because he was against Hitler and the Nazis. And so in this moment, Lieutenant Kotler is very uncomfortable because the father, and then in the movie, there's the father's father, the grandfather is also there. And so, yeah, just they're asking him questions being why didn't you bring this up before? What's the deal with your your dad? Like, why don't you talk to him? And so Lieutenant Kotler is very uncomfortable and his like loyalty is being questioned. And so that is one reason why he lashes out and beats up Pavel. And in the movie, he is removed from his station here at this camp because they feel he had been withholding this information all this time. And so as punishment, they remove him. Whereas in the book, he ends up being removed from the house because he and Bruno's mother had been having an affair. And so when the father finds this out, he gets Lieutenant Kotler kicked out. And speaking of Bruno's mother, so her character is very different from book to movie. So first of all, in the book, she was having an affair with Lieutenant Kotler, whereas in the movie, that was not the case. And in general, they just tried to make her more likable in the movie. For example, the scene where she thanks Pavel, whereas in the book, we don't get that. And then also in the movie, so in both book and movie, Bruno has a sister and she's like 12, 13. And partway through, she gets super into like the Nazis and she's hanging up posters on the wall and she has a map and like is pinning different areas based on the battles that are going on. And in the movie, the mom goes into the daughter's room and she sees all of these Nazi posters on the daughter's wall. And she is clearly like very bothered that her daughter is so gung-ho on the Nazi party. And this just didn't seem accurate or realistic, because why would the wife of a high-ranking Nazi who has moved to this house near this concentration camp so that her husband can, be in charge of what is happening here? Clearly they are very pro-Nazi and pro-military and all of that stuff. So why would she be bothered that her daughter is very pro-Nazi? Like, it doesn't make sense that she would be upset by that. And then as time goes on, the wife in the movie eventually finds out what is happening with the crematoriums. And when she discovers this, she is very upset because the husband, she feels he had kept it from her, and she is very bothered and she feels like it is so barbaric. And so she gets in an argument with him. And then from here, she kind of goes into a depression. And as time goes on, she convinces the husband that she wants to leave with the kids because she just does not like being in this environment. Whereas in the book, the crematoriums and the wife, nothing ever is mentioned with that, but the wife does want to leave simply because she misses her home and her friends. So in both, she wants to leave, but it's for very different reasons. And it's interesting because I did read that it is rumored that there was a Nazi officer. In the article I read, it specifically mentioned that it was Hedwig Haas, the wife of the Auschwitz leader. She was the one who, when she found out about the crematoriums, she was so upset and bothered that she wouldn't sleep in the same room as him. And then eventually she wanted to leave this house because she just didn't like what was happening. But then if you read other articles, other historical findings, they say the opposite. And they say that Hedwig was very proud of her husband and that she had no issues with what was going on. And so, yeah, I am more inclined to believe the latter personally. And obviously when it comes to knowing the truth about the wife of these Nazi people, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas is not the place to go to for a realistic portrayal of this woman, because both book and movie are fictional, right? And so I feel like the movie in particular took more liberties and wanted to make her more likable and sympathetic. Whereas in the book, she just was more distant for sure. And then, like I said, she wasn't bothered with her daughter and her Nazi posters, and nothing about the crematoriums is mentioned. And she's even having an affair with Lieutenant Kotler, who is a huge bully. But we need to talk about Schmuel, of course. So in both, Bruno is exploring the outside area when he comes across, the barbed wire fence, and he sees a boy wearing the striped pajamas that he sees these people wearing. Because in both book and movie, the camp is far away, but it's close enough that Bruno can see it from his window, and in the distance he can see the people and they're wearing striped pajamas, and he thinks that they are farmers because this is out in the country. But yeah, he starts talking to this boy and he finds out his name is Schmuel. Bruno ends up visiting there nearly every day, and so he is always there to talk with Schmuel, and they become very close. And yet, even through these conversations, Bruno still doesn't realize the gravity of the situation and what is happening. And there's a part in the book when it is raining, and so he isn't able to go see Schmuel, and he is talking to his sister, and he slips, and he mentions Schmuel. I feel like I'm saying the name weird. Schmuel? Was it Schmuel? It's a kind of a different version of Samuel, but it's with a CH, so Schmuel. Anyway, he slips and he mentions him to his sister, but he doesn't want his sister to know the truth because he has kept this a secret. So to cover up, he lies, and he's like, oh, that's the name of my imaginary friend. And so the sister, she's asking, she's teasing him, being like, oh, what does this imaginary friend tell you about? And then in the book we read, Yesterday, he told me that his grandfather hasn't been seen for days and no one knows where he is, and whenever he asks his father about him, he starts crying and hugs him so hard that he's worried he's going to squeeze him to death. Bruno got to the end of his sentence and realized that his voice had gone very quiet. These were things that Schmuel had told him, but for some reason he hadn't really understood at the time how sad that must have made his friend. When Bruno said them out loud to himself, he felt terrible that he hadn't tried to say anything to cheer Schmuel up and instead had started talking about something silly like exploring. "I'll say sorry for that tomorrow," he told himself. And this moment is not in the movie, but I really liked it in the book because it kind of explains partly why Bruno is so dense and doesn't realize what is happening is because he's kind of selfish, right? And he's just kind of talking about himself, and he'll like half listen to what Schmuel is telling him, but ultimately, like it says here, like Schmuel will say something and then Bruno will just kind of start talking about whatever he wants to talk about. And in the movie, so we don't get this scene, but in the movie, Bruno also isn't quite as naive because in both he has a teacher that comes to teach he and his sister, and in the movie we see how the teacher is telling them about how, you know, Jewish people are horrible people, and Bruno asks, he's like, but there's such a nice thing as nice Jews, right? And he's thinking of Schmuel. But the teacher is like, if you find a nice one, then you'll be the best explorer in the world. And so he realizes that Nazis don't like Jewish people. And in the movie, he goes to see Schmuel the next day after like getting this lesson about Jewish people, and he says the line where he's like, oh, you know, you're supposed to be my enemy and I'm supposed to hate you, but he's choosing to be his friend instead. And this line I thought was a little cheesy. It is not in the book, it's just the movie, and I felt like it was a bit too cheesy. But yeah, also in the movie, he sees his dad watching this propaganda film that has been made about the concentration camps, and this film is making it seem like the camps are like a nice place, and they have a cafe and a city square and all of this stuff. And so Bruno watches that, and he also wants to believe that his dad is a good person. And so he's like, you know, my dad wouldn't be overseeing a place that was bad, and then this video is saying it's nice. So I'm sure it's not, you know, I'm sure it's a nice place that Schmuel is staying in. Whereas in the book, Bruno thinks about how there's probably a cafe in a city center in this camp, but he just comes up with that from his own imagination as he is like imagining what it must be like to live there. So yeah, basically in the movie, Bruno was a bit more aware, but still choosing to believe the propaganda and the lies and not wanting to really see what was happening. Whereas in the book, you know, he was definitely a bit self-absorbed, as most kids are. He also was just more naive, I guess. But then partway through the story, when Lieutenant Kotler is still here, by the way, and this is like the day after he has beaten up Pavel, Bruno is walking through the house and he sees Schmuel there and he is cleaning glassware because, like I said, similar with Pavel, they will take people from the camps to come help out in the house. And so he's there cleaning glassware, and in the book, Bruno is trying to get him to eat something. He knows Schmuel is hungry, so he's offering him food, but he keeps saying no because he's like, oh, Lieutenant Kotler will know if I eat and I'm not supposed to. But Bruno kind of like pushes it on him enough that Schmuel eventually does eat, and after he is finished eating, Lieutenant Kotler comes in and he accuses him of having eaten something, and then he's also upset that he's talking to Bruno, and so Schmuel tells him like, you know, he did give me something to eat and I'm talking to him because he's my friend. But Bruno, in that moment when Lieutenant Kotler turns to him and he's like, what does he mean, like you're his friend, like do you know him? And so Bruno in that moment, he's really scared of Lieutenant Kotler, and so he lies and he's like, I don't know him, I've never seen him before. And then Bruno goes up to his room and he is just racked with guilt over not standing up for Schmuel and claiming him as his friend. Whereas in the movie, the scene is a little different because Lieutenant Kotler walks in while Schmuel is eating, and Schmuel points to Bruno and he's like, he gave it to me, he's my friend. And then in the movie, Bruno tells a bigger lie and he's like, I didn't give him the food, like he stole it and I don't know who he is. And then after this, again, Bruno, he goes up to his room and he feels terrible for having lied. And in both, we later see when he eventually does see Schmuel again outside the fence, we see that Schmuel has been beaten up. But in both, Bruno sincerely apologizes and Schmuel forgives him. And then with the ending, so in the book, near the ending, Bruno gets lice and so they have to shave his head. The movie didn't include this scene and I kind of wasn't sure why. I assume maybe the child actor just didn't want his head to be shaved. But soon after this, he finds out that he and his mom and sister will be moving. And this is in both book and movie. And so then he goes to see Schmuel and he tells him like, hey, like I have to leave in, you know, this amount of days. And Schmuel tells him that his dad has gone missing. And so Bruno tells him, he's like, oh, like if only I could get over to that side of your fence, I could help you look for your dad. Like it could be an adventure for us. And Schmuel says, he was like, well, you know, you look like me now that your head is shaved, and I can get you an extra pair of these, you know, striped pajamas. And then tomorrow on your last day, you can come help me look for my dad. And so in both book and movie, they hatch this plan. Although in the movie, because he has hair, Schmuel tells him, they wear these caps. And he's like, I can get you a hat and you can just hide your hair under that. And so the next day, Bruno meets him outside of the fence and he leaves his regular clothing outside of the fence, changes into, the uniform, and he slides under. In the movie, they also like have to dig a hole kind of. So Bruno brings a shovel. But yeah, in both, he gets under the fence, and very soon in both, he sees like what a sad, horrible place this is. And he's kind of like, actually, like, I think I should go home. But Schmuel is like, you promised you would help me find my dad, and this is the last chance because you leave like tomorrow or whatever. And so Bruno, he's like, you know what, you're right. Okay, let's look. And in the book, they look for the dad for like 90 minutes, but to no avail, of course. And then while he is still there, they gather a bunch of people together. The Nazis gather a bunch of the Jewish people together, and Bruno is like, what's happening? And he's told that they are going on a march. And this is the same in the movie, but in the movie, like, they gather the people like right off the bat. And so in both, they gather this group of people together and they put them in this room, and they are putting them in the crematorium. And so Bruno and Schmuel are holding hands as they like know that something is happening, but they don't know what. And the book ends with them dying. And in the movie, plays out the same, except soon after Bruno leaves, they are looking for Bruno and they can't find him. And so as we see what's happening with Bruno and Schmuel, we see Bruno's parents frantically looking for him, and they see the clothing outside the fence. So they are like, oh, like he's in there. And so they're running, trying to stop the crematorium in time, basically. And so the movie just filmed it in a way where it's more suspenseful, because you're like, oh no, like Bruno can't die. Like surely the dad will reach him in time. And so it was just played for more suspense. And then of course we see Bruno's mom realize what has happened, and she, like breaks down crying. And so in general, it was just much more dramatic in the movie. Whereas in the book, the parents don't even realize what has happened to Bruno. They just think he's gone missing. And it is months later that the father sees the clothing outside of the fence and he puts two and two together. And when it comes to book versus movies, so making fictional books or movies that relate to the Holocaust can be very tricky, right? Because it is such like a tragic, horrible thing. It is like guaranteed to get a reaction out of people, right? Because it's just something so devastating and evil and horrific. And so I feel like you need to be so careful in the way you write about it to not exploit it in order to like guarantee you get an emotion from your readers and watchers, right? And I do think the book did do a good job at being respectful about it. And like I said, I found Bruno to be a very sweet, compelling character, and I liked the friendship he forms with Schmuel. And the conversations we hear between the two of them were, just very sweet, and I just felt their friendship. But of course, the whole story has this like dark shadow over it, because while Bruno doesn't know the truth, the reader obviously does. And so these sweet, endearing moments, it just has this like darkness about it. Whereas in the movie, I didn't feel the friendship quite as strongly. Like maybe we just don't get as many of their conversations. And I also know it's hard to find good child actors, so there is that as well. And then I also don't like the change in the end, the fact that they did make it more suspenseful and more dramatic. You have, the parents who are like trying to race for time to get Bruno before he dies. But on top of that, you also had the very dramatic music that was playing. And all of that was just too over the top for my taste. But yeah, and the way they made the mom more likable, I just really did not like that. It seems like so unrealistic that the wife, like I said, the wife of a high-ranking Nazi who is killing thousands of Jews and is so heartless and horrible, how could the wife of a person like that be a good person, right? For one, like I feel like the wife would have to be just as heartless as the husband. And so to make her seem likable and like not realize what's happening, I don't know. Like I get with the Nazi party, they did kind of boil things over time and things did escalate and get out of control. And there were Germans who didn't like what was happening, right? And maybe at the start they were for Hitler, but as time went on, they were like, whoa, okay, he's getting crazy now. So I'm not saying that wasn't the case with real Germans, but I think specifically the wife of a concentration camp leader, like I didn't buy it and I didn't like it. And it just kind of felt wrong to portray her in this likable way. And I just didn't like it. And I felt this way even before I watched The Zone of Interest, because I read this book, I watched the movie, I wrote up my post about it, and then I watched The Zone of Interest. and now I'm here filming the video. But I had these thoughts about the wife even before I watched The Zone of Interest, which, by the way, is about Hedwig and Rolf Haas, I think was his name, the leaders of Auschwitz. And yeah, in this movie, she is just as heartless and cold as her husband. And yeah, this story, by the way, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, it does feel like a mix of the movies The Zone of Interest and Jojo Rabbit, but I don't think this movie is as good as either one of those two movies. But it is interesting because, like I said, in the book, they specifically say that they're at Auschwitz. And so I read that the author did kind of loosely base this family on the real family who we see in The Zone of Interest. And yeah, in the book, the mom, again, she was just more detached. And we don't see into her personally the way we do see into Bruno. And so we don't see the length of her heartlessness and her detachment. But yeah, and then the ending too, it was just a bit too over the top when she finds out Bruno has died. And like I said, the music, like it got to the point where it did feel like they were trying to manipulate the audience a bit too much to get a reaction. Like the story we read in the book is already just so heartbreaking and horrible and terrible and chilling that you don't need it to be so overdramatic with the acting and the music. And if anything, it just took away from what should have been this climactic, horrible moment. Like it just felt like they were squeezing the drama a bit too much, whereas in the book, it was just very straightforward and simple. So yeah, basically what I'm saying, like I didn't absolutely hate the movie, but I definitely disliked it, and I would say the book wins without a doubt. And yeah, I guess that wraps up my thoughts on The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Let me know your thoughts down below. I loved this book. I really liked it. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments if you liked it, if you hated it, if you're somewhere in between. And let me know what you think of the movie, whether you've read the book or not. Share your thoughts down below. And going back to The Zone of Interest, I did talk about this semi-recently when I did my rankings of the Best Picture nominees, because The Zone of Interest is a Best Picture nominee. So I listed this one as number 6. So using the timestamps, if you watch that video and jump ahead to number 6, you can hear what I have to say about The Zone of Interest. It is definitely a movie worth watching. So is Jojo Rabbit, by the way. I love Jojo Rabbit. So yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.